the podcast. This is Ron's Amazing Stories, where we play tales to take you to Bavaria.
Ron, what is going on with the music?
I'm glad you asked, British guy. Today we have a podcast full of Germany.
That doesn't make sense.
Oh, but it will. You see, we have a show filled with cute and funny references to germane German stuff. We have an email from Frankfurt, a short story from modern Germany, a moment in time about the Berlin Airlift, and I picked one of my favorite growing up tales from Tom, who lives in Berlin.
That is a lot of Deutsche Sorg.
Yes, it is, British guy. Yes, it is. We also have a sci-fi tale sent in by Max and read by Cody. How about that? But before we get to any of it, here is our weekly 5-minute mystery.
Another 5-minute mystery.
This 5-minute mystery is being brought to you by Too Much Air. Have you ever had bad air? Or maybe had to clear the air between you and a friend? Did you know that you can scrub the air by telling the truth? Well, we present a story with lots of air.
Hello, Andy. Just found out you were traveling with me.
What do you want, Thomas? This is a private compartment.
Now, is that the way to greet your ex-partner?
Beat it, you crook. I'm through with your double dealing.
Yeah, what about that dough you owe me from the last take?
You got a head like an elephant. Blow, brother. The air's getting bad in here.
Yeah? Now, let me open the window then. I'll clear it out.
Hey, are you crazy? You'll blow us out of here.
Okay, Andy. Here you go.
Let go of me, you...
Good fellow, Andy. Just a few seconds, we'll be in the tunnel where it's nice and dark. And then I'll give you all the fresh air you want. Just a minute now, and we'll be there. Okay. There you go.
Nothing like this ever happened on this railroad during my time, Mr. Thomas. Can't tell you how sorry I am about your friend.
That's all right, conductor. Not the fault of the railroad. Can't stop a suicide.
Well, what makes you think it was a suicide? He might have fallen out of the window when he tried to open it.
Yeah, that's possible, sure, but he looked pretty down the mouth when I left him to grab a smoke in the lounge car.
Well, why can you smoke in the compartment? That's the advantage of having one of these times.
Andy, my friend was a little touchy about the air in there, so I came out.
What happened after you went out for a smoke?
Well, I got into a business conversation with a few of the gentlemen in the lounge, but after a while, I figured I'd better be getting back to the compartment to see how Andy was getting along. As I came into the aisle next to the drawing room cars, we came into the tunnel. I knew that Andy's room was only 3 doors away, so I felt my way along in the dark to his door. When I opened it, I felt a sudden rush of air in the room. I closed the door and tried to find the light switch, but I couldn't.
The train was still in the tunnel?
Yeah. I lit a match and saw that the window of the train was wide open. Andy's coat and hat was on the seat and his bag was on the rack. But he was gone.
Oh, I see. Well, that'll be sufficient, Mr. Thomas. I have enough for my report.
Okay. If you need me, I'll be in my compartment.
And please stay there, Mr. Thomas. For when we reach our next stop, I'm turning you over to the police for murder.
By what damaging slip in his story did Johnny Thomas prove to the conductor that he was the murderer of his former partner? In just a moment, we'll know. But first...
As promised, lots of air to talk about today. Even a fun pun about air if you listened really carefully. What air did our conductor turn into a reason to suspect murder? I think the secret lies in the amount of air. This 5-minute mystery is being brought to you by Too Much Air.
And now, back to our story.
Are you crazy? What do you mean I murdered Andy? Prove it.
Easily. You said that when you opened the door to your friend's compartment, you felt a sudden rush of air in the room. That was true. But you then told me that you lit a match and that it stayed lit while you had time to notice several details in the compartment. And that's where your story fell apart, Mr. Thomas. No match would stay lit for more than a split second in the face of that rush of air sweeping in from the open window in the tunnel.
And I thought I had an airtight alibi.
That was your mistake. There was too much air.
Foiled by a small detail. Dark tunnel equals dark cabin. Lots of air equals no match fire. I think they got the guy. By the way, did you notice that we really did have a motive this time? Revenge is a dish that is best served cold. Khan said that. This 5-minute mystery was brought to you by Too Much Air.
What's that you say?
We have an email from Melissa Gerhardt, who lives in Frankfurt, Germany. She has sent in a whole new category of email. I can honestly say I've never had one like this one before. As she states in her note, her English is not so good, so I edited this one just a bit. I don't like to edit emails, but I made an exception in this case, and here are Melissa's thoughts. Hello, Ron. Grüße aus Deutschland. Greetings from Germany. I wanted you to know that Tom is not the only German who loves your program. I found you late one night while looking for references to the new Amazing Stories series reboot. You were on page 3 of the search results. You should work on that. I wanted to tell you a bit about my home. Frankfurt is known as the gateway to Europe, and travelers often only pass through, using it as a transit point to other major destination cities. It's spread along both banks of the Main River, hence its formal name, Frankfurt am Main. The city has always held a special place in German history. Not only did it give its country its most famous writer, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, but it also is the site of coronation, kings, and emperors of the Roman Empire. Also, most don't realize that most of the city had to be rebuilt after World War II. Frankfurt suffered such extensive damage that much of its Altstadt, Old Town, had to be rebuilt. The restoration project began in the 50s and was just completed in 2017. Did you know that more than half of Frankfurt inhabitants have non-German backgrounds and more than 100 different languages are spoken on a daily basis? So for all of that, a diverse art, music, and food scene is the result. Frankfurt's neighborhoods each has a distinct character and charm. Sachsenhausen, with its cobblestone streets and museums, is for those who like to experience the cultural heritage. Ostend and Nordend are known for their many cafes and boutique, while West End, the old bourgeois district, is full of beautiful botanical gardens. I am very proud of my Stadt, city, and just wanted to share this. Please excuse my English writing. I had a friend read it just to be sure. Thank you for your podcast, and thank you for everything you do. Auf Wiedersehen und ich hoffe, Sie können das in der Show verwenden. Which translated is, goodbye, and I hope you can use this on your show. Melissa Gerhardt, Frankfurt, Germany. Well, Melissa, as you can see, I did read your note and I loved it. I did have to use Google Translate to understand parts of it, but I do have to say I had a lot of fun doing that. Thank you for sharing your city. Want to hear a bit of good news? I just received a report from our radio producer at amfm247.com. I asked him to update me on the numbers. I hope you're as excited as I am to hear that the average number of listeners on the 11 p.m. Eastern time slot is at 83,258 people per show. That is a direct quote and is up from the last report. Those of you who listen on the radio, I thank you. On the internet side of the show, I like to look at the average number of downloads per day. That number is a bit slow right now, but they are cracking down on what is considered a unique download. That number is holding steady at 511 per day. By the way, I just happened to look at the all-time downloads for the show, and that number now stands at 947,542. How about that? Again, thank you to all of you that listen via the streaming sites. And now, this message from Gladys Goodies.
I'm Gladdy, the dachshund, the face of Gladdy's Goodies. Are you worried about your pet's health? My parents were too, especially since I developed pancreatitis. They couldn't find any treats I could eat, so they made some. Our natural treats are healthy for all dogs, with and without health issues. We have lots of delicious flavors like chicken, turkey, salmon, sweet potato, beef, and more. With our homemade treats, you won't worry about the contents because they have no chemicals, fillers, or bad ingredients. Go to GladysGoodies.com now to get your fur friend a bag and pick them up some swag while you're there. You'll be glad you did. Remember, we have the treats and swag to make their tails wag. Again, that's GladysGoodies.com. Again, that's GladysGoodies.com.
Don't forget to use our very own promo code, RONS, to get a 20% discount on all your purchases. That is RONS. Thank you, Gladdy. And now, here are your stories.
These are your stories, sent by you, for you.
Story is from Texas. I love orb tales, and we seem to be getting more of these all the time. I did a bit of research hoping to find that there was an uptick in these types of stories. Alas, I found nothing to support my theory. This one was sent in by Marc Reese from San Antonio. He calls it The Creature of Phantom Lake Canal. I was in my early 20s and was out with a group of friends. We all drove out to the canal that we sometimes fished at. Upon arrival, my friend parked his car on a concrete bridge and we all got out. We were hanging out, listening to music and just killing time, talking about this and that. As my friends were talking, I looked downstream and I could see the lights of the cars driving on US 77 as they sped by. As I continued to look, I noticed a small orb of light that flashed on and off on the left bank of the canal a good distance away. I didn't think anything of it and thought it was a firefly. My friends continued talking and I joined in on the conversation. A few minutes passed and I glanced downstream again to see the flashing orb was now heading in our direction, following the bank. It would flash brightly and then turn off and then flash back on, but several feet closer. It repeated this a few times and then an alarm went off inside me. I don't know why, I just knew that we had to get out of there. A feeling of horror and terror struck me and I opened the driver's side door of my friend's car and jumped in. I began yelling at my friends to also get in. Thankfully, they listened and I drove a short distance down the dirt road. One of my friends demanded that I stop the car, got out, and asked what had scared me. I told him what I saw. He didn't believe me and started to walk back towards the bridge. A few seconds later, he came running back, hopped in, and screamed, "Roll up the windows!" Then something hit the back of the car, causing it to rock. I started the engine, and we sped out of there. Once at a safe distance, I asked my friend what he saw. He said that when he looked back at the bridge, he saw a dark shadow with red eyes. The hair on the back of my neck just stood up as I typed this, even after so many years. This is a true story on everything I love. Thanks for reading. Marc Reese, San Antonio, Texas. Wow, Marc, that was terrifying. Most orb stories seem quite neutral about things and intentions. Yours appears to be downright malignant. Thank you for sharing it with us, and I'm glad that you made it out safe. This next story comes from heaven. Well, sort of. Mattie Pittman from Glens Ferry, Idaho, sent in this email that I call Parma's Angel. Hello, Ron. I am displaced in time. No, I'm not a time traveler. I'm just a person that believes that I should have been born in the 40s. I believe I would have flourished back then. In today's world, I always feel out of sorts, a step behind, if you will. I think that's why I was drawn to your podcast. You're the same, and your work shows both a love for our past and that you are able to cope with our now. Thank you for giving me a place where I feel at home. I do have a story for you. You mentioned that you like a good angel story. I hope that you will find my adventure both a head-scratcher and divine. I was 10, I think, when this story took place. We were living in Parma, Idaho at the time. My parents have a small farm there where we grew corn and raised cattle. We attended church every Sunday and helped the poor. My mom and I would take food and supplies to migrant worker camps every spring. One day, after making a delivery, one of the wheels came off our truck and we plunged into a ditch. My mother was badly injured and I was left to find help. There was no such thing as cell phones those days to call 911. We were on a deserted back road and I had no idea where, so I picked a direction and began to walk. I was still in sight of our truck when a man walked up to me and asked if I needed help. He seemed to come out of nowhere. I remember that I was crying and that I just pointed to our truck and said, "My mommy's hurt." He picked me up and carried me back, and then I fell asleep. I woke up in the hospital with my head on my dad's lap, without a scratch. My mom had broken ribs, a concussion, and a few bruises, but was okay. From what my dad told me, the man had somehow fixed the truck enough to drive them to the hospital and then disappeared. You can believe what you want about this story, but I know this was an angel sent to help us when we needed the most. I remember his face was so kind, and I felt total peace in his arms. Mattie Pittman, Glens Ferry, Idaho. Well, I believe you, Mattie. Furthermore, you're right. I do love an angel story. And one more thing, I too think I would have done well if I had been born 40s. Thank you for your story. I think this just might have to be one of my favorites of all time. Do you want to tell your story? Head to the main website at ronsamazingstories.com and click on the story submission banner. Fill it out, and the next thing you know, you'll be hearing your story on the show. If you don't want to tell it, just leave your contact information. I will contact you, and we'll write your story together. But do it today because we want to hear what you have to say. Our featured story for this time comes from the book The Meadow Sprite and Other Tales of Modern Germany. It was translated by Gertrude Schottenfels. Gertrude collected and arranged 11 original tales from Germany written by Richard von Volkmann and Rudolf Baumbach, two authors who were active in the middle of the 19th century. The tales are varied and were meant to be enjoyed by both children and their parents. Now, I picked my personal favorite from the book that I found quite inspirational and fun to read. It is titled The Wishing Ring and is read for us by Richard Ackerman.
The Wishing Ring by Richard von Volkmann. Translated by Gertrude R. Schottenfels. A young man, who had formerly been unprosperous as an innkeeper, and was now a farmer, sat upon his plough one day and rested for a moment while he wiped the sweat from his brow. An old witch happened to pass by, and asked, "Why do you work so hard when it avails you not? Journey straight ahead for 2 days until you reach a pine tree in the forest, which stands apart by itself and towers above every other tree around. Cut it down, and your fortune will be made." The farmer needed no second bidding, but straightway shouldered his axe and started on his quest. And exactly 2 days later, he came upon the tree. He hastened to fell it, and no sooner had it crashed to the ground than from its topmost boughs there fell a nest. 2 eggs rolled out of the nest and broke upon the ground, and as they broke, a young eagle emerged from one, while from the other fell a ring of gold. The eagle grew before his very eyes, until it attained 1/2 the height of an ordinary man. Then it spread its wings, as though it were anxious to try them, soared a little distance from the ground, and cried, "You have given me my freedom. Take the ring, which was in the other egg, as a token of my thanks. It is a wishing ring. If you turn it round your finger and make a wish, your wish will be immediately fulfilled. But remember, there is only one wish in the ring. Therefore, consider well before you wish, that you may have no regrets later on." Thereupon the eagle soared high in the air, circled slowly above the farmer's head, and then winged its way straight as an arrow toward the east. The man took the ring, put it on his finger, and hastened homeward. Toward evening he reached a little town, where he chanced to see a goldsmith standing in front of his shop. Many costly rings were on sale. The farmer showed his ring and asked what it was worth. "A fig," replied the goldsmith. At that the farmer laughed loud and merrily, and assured him it was a wishing ring, and worth more than all the rings together which he had on sale. Now the goldsmith was a base deceiver, and as tricky as he was deceitful. So he invited the farmer to stay overnight with him, saying, "To entertain a man like you, with such a gem in his possession, is sure to bring one good luck." He entertained him with his choicest wines and smoothest words, and put him to bed in his best chamber. But in the dead of night, while the farmer lay sunk in sleep, the goldsmith stole softly into his room, and carefully removed the wishing ring from his finger. Then, just as carefully, he replaced it with an ordinary ring, which to all outward appearances was identical with the one he stole. The next day he could scarcely wait for the farmer to take his departure. He woke him very early, saying, "You have a long journey ahead of you, so it will be to your advantage to get an early start." As soon as he had gone, the jeweller locked his shop, hastened into his own room, where no prying eyes might see him, and locked and bolted the door. Then he stood in the centre of the room, turned the ring round on his finger, and cried, "I want $100,000 immediately." Scarcely had the words left his lips ere it began to rain silver dollars. Down they poured, hard and shining, like water in a trough. They struck his head, his breast, and shoulders. He began to shriek with pain, and sprang to the door to escape. But before he could reach it, he was felled to the ground and lay there faint and bleeding. And still the dollars came, like a veritable silver hailstorm, until the floor collapsed beneath the strain. It caved in, and the poor goldsmith, with all his wealth, fell into the dark cellar. And still the dollars continued to fall upon his lifeless form, until 100,000 had descended. The neighbours heard the noise, and came running thither. And when they beheld the goldsmith lying dead beneath all those hard shining dollars, they said, "Verily, it is a great misfortune to have too much money fall to one's lot." Then came the jeweller's heirs, who divided it all up among themselves, and so, in the end, it had availed him naught. Meanwhile, the farmer proceeded on his way home with a heart full of rejoicing. He showed the ring to his wife, and said, "This time it cannot fail. Our fortune is made. but we will think it all over carefully ere we decide upon our wish." His wife was ready with her advice. "Suppose we wish for that triangular piece of land adjoining ours. We have always wanted it." "It's not worth while," returned her husband. "If we have a little patience and work diligently, we can soon save enough to buy those acres." So they worked most industriously for a year, and never before had they had such a plentiful harvest. They were not only able to buy the coveted piece of land, but they even had a little money left over. "See," said the man with great joy, "we not only have the land we wished, but our wish itself is intact." "Yes, indeed," replied his wife, "and a good thing it is, for now we can buy a horse and cow." But he only jingled the money in his pocket and asked, "Why should we waste our precious wish on such beggarly trifles? We need only work hard a little longer, and we can soon earn our horse and cow." And sure enough, at the end of the second year, both horse and cow stood in their stalls. Then the man rubbed his hands together in content and said, "Well, our wish is spared for another year, and we have everything for which we longed. Haven't we had the most wonderful good luck?" But his wife begged him earnestly to make up his mind what he wanted, and to wish for it. He steadfastly refused to waste his wish, when they could so easily earn what they needed. At length she became angry, and exclaimed, "I hardly recognize you nowadays. Formerly you did nothing but grumble, and pity yourself, and wish for everything under the sun. Now, when it really is in your power to have anything you please, you hem and haw and make excuses, and are content with everything that come along. Why, you are letting our best years slip by. You might be a count, a king, or even an emperor, with his coffers filled with gold. But no, you can't make up your mind what to choose." "Oh, stop your everlasting urging and nagging," rejoined her husband. "We are both still young, and life is long. Remember, there is but one wish in the ring, and that is soon used up. The time may come when we shall be really hard-pressed, and how handy the wish will be then. What ails you, anyway? What do you want? Haven't we everything we could possibly need? Since I got the ring, haven't we prospered so that everyone is marvelling at our good fortune? Do be reasonable. In the meantime, you can be considering what we would better wish for." And that was the end of their dispute. It really did seem as though the ring had brought a blessing with it, and in the course of time, the little farm became a very large one, upon whose many acres many servants were employed, and the farmer, despite all his wealth and prosperity, continued to work as hard as ever from sheer force of habit. But in the evening, when he had finished his supper, he would sit on his doorstep in the failing twilight, smoking his pipe contentedly and wishing his neighbours good evening. Thus many years sped by. Occasionally, when they were all by themselves, with no one near to overhear them, she would make him all sorts of propositions concerning the wish. But he always replied that they had ample time left, and as time went on, they spoke of it less and less frequently, and finally ceased to mention it at all. Not that they had forgotten it, far from it, for a dozen times a day he would turn it round on his finger, as though about to make a wish, but he always carefully guarded his lips from speaking it aloud. 30 years slipped by, then 40. The farmer and his wife were old and grey, and still the wish remained unuttered. Then the gracious All-Father blessed them both, and summoned them both to their final reward in the self-same night. Children and grandchildren wept around their bier, and refused to be comforted. One of them started to remove the ring from the old man's finger, with the intention of preserving it as a treasured keepsake, but the eldest son interfered, saying, "Leave it where it is. He kept its history a secret all his life long. Let him carry it with him into the grave. It is probably an old love token. Our Blessed Mother also often looked at it, as though she too knew its secret. If the truth were known, she probably gave it to him herself when they were young." So the wishing ring, which in reality was no wishing ring, was buried with him, and he never knew the truth. It certainly had brought them all the happiness and good fortune one could desire, and the original ring could have done no more. So you see, dear children, that it all depends upon who holds possession of a thing. For even the best of things in evil hands may prove a curse rather than a blessing.
I thought that story was pretty neat and well read. I've always believed that the best way to get what you want is to work for it. Something my dad instilled in me, I guess. He never had much and always seemed to appreciate what he did have. If you want to hear more stories from the book The Meadow Sprite and Other Tales of Modern Germany, I'll have a link to the book in the show notes. I'll also have a link to the audio version, both of which are in the public domain and completely free of charge. And now for a moment in time. The date is June 15th, 1948, and this is A Moment in Time. After World War II, the Allies partitioned the defeated Germany into 4 zones: Soviet, America, British, and French. Berlin, the German capital city, was located deep in the Soviet zone, but it also was divided into 4 zones. The Russians wanted Berlin all for themselves. So in June of 1948, they closed all the highways, railroads, and canals into Western-occupied Berlin. They believed that this would make it impossible for the people who lived there to get needed supplies and would eventually drive Britain, France, and the United States out of the city for good. However, instead of retreating from West Berlin, the Allies decided to supply their sectors from the air. This effort became known as the Berlin Airlift. It lasted for more than a year and carried over 2.3 million tons of cargo into West Berlin. How about that? Now, I was chatting with our very own Tom Williams, and he recently went to a celebration in Berlin of this very event. His report? He had a fantastic time meeting with actual people who were part of this historic happening. And he did it all from the point of view of an American who remembers the airlift and is now a resident of Berlin. Here is an audio clip of then President Harry S. Truman, who makes his thoughts known as to how he felt about it all.
The Russians shut off all highway, rail, and river traffic into Berlin, and the only thing left for the Allies to do was to fly supplies into the city. The Russians didn't care how many people they starved to death if they could push the Allies out of Germany, which they were trying very hard to do. And they didn't care how many children starved to death for the lack of milk. They didn't care how many people starved to death. They have no heart whatever about anything. They have a small value for human life, because in the days when this was happening, Russia was the most populous country on the globe. But they've gotten caught up with now. They've got a friend on the southeast corner of their great country that has 700 million people to their 200. And they're beginning to get a little shaky in their boots, and they're much easier to deal with now. If the Chinese take a northern march into Siberia, they can't stop them, because 200 million can't stop 700 million people when they want to get somewhere. And I'm very sorry that that had to take place. Of course, we felt very badly about this situation with the breaking of their first major agreement after World War II, but it didn't seem to bother them one little bit. They have no sense of honor. I don't have any use for them. I wouldn't trust a Russian to cross the street.
He continued on this subject with this snippet from a press conference.
So that we could place our difficulties before them, argue it out, and then have the decision of that organization enforced. The Russians had been disappointed in several of their undertakings since the war, and they were of the opinion that they ought to have a victory in Berlin. I felt that they should not have a victory in Berlin, that wasn't the place for them to have a victory. And we did stay in Berlin, and we flew the supplies in over East Germany. And it was necessary that we do this in order to stand the Russians up.
And finally, he gave a little detailed information on the Berlin Airlift itself.
The planes came from Alaska, from California, from Tokyo, from Texas, from our allies. Some of them did. We got a few from our allies. And from every place we had planes, every airfield in the country was stripped of its transport planes, and they were put into the airlift. And now we had to wait for the Russian reaction.
Most historians agree that the blockade was a failure. It amped up Cold War tensions and made the USSR look like a cruel and unstable enemy. It hastened the separation of West Germany and motivated the creation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, which, by the way, still exists today. Well, there you have it, and this was A Moment in Time.
As read by. Amazing stories read by amazing people.
This time on As Read By, we have a story about a story. A few weeks ago, I received this email from Max Fields from New Jersey. Max wrote, "Hello, Ron. Big fan of the podcast. I listen to the show whenever I can on Stitcher Radio. I really enjoyed the story Second Variety by Philip K. Dick. You mentioned that it came from the old pulp mags of the 1950s. This got me to thinking, and I set out to find more of these stories. I found out that they are plentiful and available on the Gutenberg Project. I also found this one, and I thought it went very well with your show and Second Variety. I have attached the PDF file to this email, and I hope that you can use it. Max." Well, I read the story and thought it was pretty neat and decided to read it for you guys. But hold the phone. At the same time, I started an email thread with Cody Appadale. We talked about the 5-Minute Mysteries and how he would like to help out with the upcoming original productions. I had him do a test read and he joined the team. Then I thought, why not have Cody read Max's story? Great idea, right? So here is Cody Appadale reading Longevity by Therese Windsor, which was sent in by Max Fields.
Longevity by Therese Windsor. Legend had it that many thousands of years ago, right after the Great Hoar, the whole continent of the West had slowly sunk beneath the west water, and that once every century it arose during a full moon. Still, Captain Hinrich clung to the hope that the legend would not be borne out by truth. Perhaps the West Continent still existed, perhaps, dare he hope, with civilization. The crew of the Semilunis thought him quite mad. After all, hadn't the East and South continents been completely annihilated from the great skyfires? And wasn't it said that they had suffered but a fraction of what the West Continent had endured? The Semilunis anchored at the mouth of a great river. The months of fear and doubt were at an end. Here, at last, was the West Continent. A small party of scouts was sent ashore with many cautions to be alert for luminescent areas which meant certain death for those who remained too long in its vicinity. Armed with bow and arrow, the party made its way slowly up the great river. Nowhere was to be seen the color green, only dull browns and grays, and no sign of life, save for an occasional patch of lichen on a rock. After several days of rowing, the food and water supply was almost half depleted, and still no evidence of either past or present habitation. It was time to turn back. To travel all the weary months across the west water, the journey all in vain. What a small reward for such an arduous trip, just proof of the existence of a barren landmass, ugly and useless. On the second day of the return to the Semilunis, the scouting party decided to stop and investigate a huge opening in the rocky mountainside. How suspiciously regular and even it looked, particularly in comparison to the rest of the countryside, which was ragged and chaotic. They entered the cave apprehensively, torches aflare and weapons in hand, but all was darkness and quiet. Still, the regularity of the cave walls led them on. Some creature, man or otherwise, must have planned and built this, but to what end? Now, the cave divided into 3 forks. The torches gave only a hint of the immensity of the chambers that lay at the end of each. They selected the center chamber, approaching cautiously, breath caught in awe and excitement. The torches reflected on a dull black surface, which was divided into many, many little squares. The sameness of them stretched for unaccountable yards in all directions. What were these ungodly-looking edifices? The black surface was cold and smooth to the touch, and quite regular, except for a strange little hole at the bottom of each square, and a curious row of pictures along the top. They would copy these strange pictures. Perhaps back home there would be a scholar who could understand the meaning behind these last remains of the people of the West Continent. The leader took out his slate and painstakingly copied. Safeguard your valuables at Iron Mountain Records Management, a global company. Vault number 45443566782. The end.
Great job, Cody, and thank you, Max, for sending this in. Longevity was written by Therese Windsor and first appeared in the May 1960 edition of Amazing Science Fiction Stories. I wasn't able to find a thing about the author. I'm guessing the name was an alias. This was a common practice during the flash fiction era. And the style? Well, that seems to suggest a Philip K. Dick association, which was what I think Max was suggesting. Philip surely did love the apocalyptic theme. One last thing about this story is the mention of Iron Mountain. This place actually exists today and was recently brought to my attention on an episode of Ozzy and Jack's World Detour. On the show, Ozzy Osbourne visited the underground facility at Iron Mountain and listened to one of his original recordings while with Black Sabbath. It is now stored at Iron Mountain for all eternity. How about that? To Cody and Max, I say thank you for taking part in the show today. You know, sometimes I get a surprise when I'm doing this show. Everything falls into a theme of sorts without me really doing a thing. You probably noticed that we had an email from Frankfurt, a short story from a German author, and a moment in time during the Cold War. What did all these have in common? Well, Germany. Funny how that happens. I thought about including another tie for our German friends, and what better way to do that than with our own Tom Williams. So here's a replay of one of my favorite growing up stories he sent in, and I hope you enjoy it. This one first aired on July 26, 2018, as part of episode number 338, Terror at Alamo Lake.
As read by Amazing Stories, read by amazing people.
This time on As Read By, we have the next installment of Growing Up with Tom Williams. This time, Tom tells us about Southern drive-ins, and I have to say, this might be my favorite one yet.
Growing up and outdoor movies. You know, the construction of a drive-in movie was the greatest thing for us kids, at least in the beginning. The first drive-in movie I ever saw wasn't completely thought out by its owners, at least not in my mind. It was named the Do Drive In. That I like. It could have been a moneymaker if it weren't for a couple of bad ideas. It was constructed about a mile from grandmother's house. That wasn't a mistake and was great for all the kids in the neighborhood. No, we didn't have cars at that tender age, but let me explain. First thing is, when you construct something like that, you, yes, build it on a major road with easy access, but no, don't have the giant screen facing the road. There were major problems with car parking and people standing outside the roadside watching the movie for free. The police were continually running people off, It was a major traffic problem for a long time, to say the least. The property was completely without any fence. The first year, the kids in the neighborhood could freely walk in and watch the movie, and it was permitted. Then the owner got wise and made the kids pay a nominal entrance fee. That is, until he had to build a 10-foot fence around the area to stop the kids from coming in from all sides without paying. I won't say that I was one of them, but that fence didn't stop them either. They just dug small holes under the fence and covered the holes with brush. Getting frustrated with a financial loss, the owner then dug a deep ditch, or a moat as you might call it, on the outside of the fence along the perimeter. From that point on, he had to have guards to patrol outside to find the boards that they laid down to cross the moat. By this time, the kids were old enough to have a car and would pack the trunk with kids to get them in for free. Eventually, the owner got it right, and the drive-in started making money. Now, every drive-in has its own problems depending on where it's located, if it's built in the north or south. Now, for the south, there were those pesky mosquitoes again. While sitting in a car, you could hear slaps going on in the other cars near you. It was of two choices: the boyfriend getting fresh with his date, or those mosquitoes, or both. At the concession stand, besides snacks, you could purchase a device to keep the mosquitoes at bay. It was pure poison. It was a ring in a tray that you would light with a match to smolder during the show and made your eyes water badly. It was an advantage for the boyfriends, I guess, because the date couldn't see well enough what the next advance her date would be making. If you came by foot, there were benches in front of the concession stand. It meant easy pickings for the mosquitoes, though. And if you had a date, it wasn't a place for privacy. So I called it a wish I had a date section. Irregardless of all this, it was a fun time. After the show was over, we kids had to walk home in the dark, which was an adventure too. Not wanting to walk the long way home, we would take the shortcut through the woods, which ended in the backyard of a man who had a pack of dogs, just waiting. My cousin Fred said, "Tommy, load your pockets with rocks from the drive-in grounds. We'll need 'em." We left the drive-in by the front of the entrance and crossed the highway. The sky was clear, the moon and stars were shining, and there was a slight fog developing. In the background, you could hear the crickets, and off in the distance a dog would bark. It's a good thing we didn't see a monster movie that night, or I would have taken the long way home. Through the dark woods we made our way through. Then came the little creek that was wide enough where you couldn't get across without getting your feet wet. Someone thought of us, though. Someone had been that way before, because they had tied a rope on a limb, and we were able to swing over to the other side, and we were then coming into the old man's backyard who had the dogs. As silently as possible, we tried to slip by without making a noise. Suddenly, one dog barked, and that alerted all the rest. "Throw your rocks," Fred said. "Throw your rocks, Tommy." We all started running. My problem was that I filled all my pockets with the largest rocks I could find, and that was my undoing. The weight of all those rocks were already pulling my pants off the whole trip. I immediately threw everything I had, using the shotgun effect. I was then light as a feather, and outran my cousin Fred, which no kid could do in the neighborhood. He was always the fastest kid around until that night. Have you ever had a laughing spasm? We never had such a laugh as we did that night when we got home. I wish to this day I could laugh like that again. Here's to the good old days. Sincerely, Tom.
Thank you, Tom. That is my favorite story so far. I remember as a kid there was a drive-in at the corner of 18th and Andresen. Many times we would sneak people in, set up lawn chairs in front of the car, and enjoy the heck out of a good movie. That drive-in is gone now, and most of the land is a Winco. However, the old marquee is still there and is a beacon to us that remember the better times. For those of you who don't know, Tom lives in Germany and was raised in the South. He's sent in these tales from his youth. You can expect to hear more of them in upcoming episodes, and I personally can't wait. Thank you, Tom. Der Podcast ist geschlossen und ich möchte mich bedanken. Melissa Gerhardt, Marc Reese, Mattie Pittman, Max Fields, Cody Appadale, and Tom Williams. If you want to follow the podcast or the blog, just head to ronsamazingstories.com. There you'll find an amazing number of links that should fit every need. Want to help the show? The best thing you can do is to tell your friends all about it, and please leave reviews or feedback wherever you listen. This helps us to grow. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come again to find out what are Ron's amazing stories.
All of the vintage audio used in the podcast is believed to be in the public domain. Ron's Amazing Stories does not own the rights to any of the old-time radio used here. If you hold the rights to any of the shows played, please contact us immediately at ronsamazingstories.com.